You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
Welcome to Scuderia F1, the podcast that's always up to speed with the latest Formula One news. Follow us on Twitter at Scuderia F1 Pod and subscribe to the show on iTunes and Stitcher. Now, here are your hosts, Mark Daly and Kevin Laramie.
One more time, we're gonna celebrate. Oh yeah, alright, don't stop the dancing. One more time, we're gonna celebrate. Oh yeah, alright, don't stop the dancing. One more time, we're gonna celebrate.
And we are back on Scuderia F1, the podcast that is always up to speed with Formula One, back from a little winter hiatus, Mark. And one thing that for sure has caught our attention in the last few weeks is the amount of drama and news and big decisions that happened in the offseason in Formula One.
You're nailing it right on the head. I mean, it was absolutely amazing. I think that when I look back now to the first week of December, when Nico Rosberg dropped that absolute bombshell out of nowhere to retire just 5 days after winning his first Formula One World Championship. I woke up in the morning because I'm in Vancouver, you're in Montreal, you're a couple hours ahead of us. You had sent me the message that Nico had retired, and it was really weird because I'd gone to sleep the night before, texting with a friend of mine in Holland, talking about Nico and his World Championship, and then to wake up and see your message on my phone. It took a minute to really register as to what happened. And that really kicked off everything. Forget the normal lull and the real break that you have over Christmas. There's been nothing but speculation and rumor and all sorts of things really playing out over the last, well, basically about 6 weeks until earlier this week when Valtteri Bottas was confirmed at last as the replacement for Nico Rosberg at Mercedes. But it was long rumored, and I guess it wasn't too much of a surprise in the end, was it, Kevin?
No, but just go back to the surprise of Nico Rosberg retiring 5 days after winning his championship. What surprised me very much is the way it went down. Maybe he did realize all his dreams, all his goal, and didn't feel that it needed to risk his life or risk his reputation, risk whatever by driving. Maybe he outweighs the pros and the cons and realized, you know what? I can just step away and I'll have a good reputation. I'm a good driver. I'm a world champion. Nobody will take that away. And maybe I didn't see the potential of me doing it again, but who knows? What I'm wondering is that phone call when he's like, all right, I'm going to call Toto Wolff to announce his decision. Toto, yeah. Hi, Nico. Congratulations on your victory. Oh, thank you. I want to retire. What? The crickets must have been amazing.
Yeah, talk about an awkward phone call. I mean, that is a really... I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in Toto Wolff's office when that phone call went through, because that was an absolute shock. And to think that it took him such a short amount of time, really, to decide to hang up his racing boots and his gloves and his helmet and decide to call it a career. It was absolutely astonishing. And of course, that throws a big wrench into the works because he was under contract for next year, as is Lewis Hamilton. And the pair have dominated Formula One for the last several years. Last year, they won, 19 out of 21 races. Nico won 9, Lewis won 10. So you had to...
Verstappen and Ricciardo won the other two.
Yeah. And even that seems kind of amazing to think that when I was looking back at the results from last year, I was thinking, was it only 2 races that the Red Bull drivers won? Of course, Ricciardo should have won Monaco, but that's a different story. But when you think, though, you have a pair of drivers that have been so dominant like Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton, and you have them under contract, you're obviously looking ahead to the new year. And new regulations, new cars aside, you have to think that whatever happens, that Mercedes is going to be the favorite, if not one of the favorites, going into 2017. And you would think that, considering how much that Mercedes has really invested and they've really put into their program, their Formula One program over the years, that they would really want to sew up and win another world championship and another world drivers championship. So that obviously must have come as a huge shock to them when Nico said, you know what, guys, I'm good. I'm done. I'm out of here.
Yeah. I want to bring you back, Mark, 1 second, to that domino effect that it had on the entire roster of drivers for different teams. Okay, but it started with Felipe Massa retiring, Lance Stroll being hired to to Williams, sorry. So you had Lance Stroll and Bottas, technically, for Williams. But then Nico Rosberg retires. So what happens? All right, Valtteri Bottas goes there. Okay, Pascal Verheyen was maybe slotted to go from Manor to go back to his Mercedes because he's a young driver from Mercedes. But then no. Okay, so we need a place for Verheyen. Okay. Sober. All right. Felipe Nasser was not necessarily effective for you. Bye-bye, Mr. Nasser. Welcome, Verheyen, to Sauber with Marcus Ericsson. So there's another domino that fell there. And it's been, all right, so we still need a driver for Williams. Let's call Felipe Massa. Why not one last year? Come on, you can do it. You can mentor Lance Stroll and show him the ropes. And maybe with your experience and having experienced a transformation of F1, different era, a different type of cars, and the challenges of discovering a new car as a driver, the experience of Felipe Massa might be priceless and really helpful to a Lance Stroll that is discovering F1 with the new cars that will start in 2017. So that combination might be very interesting. And then for Force India, because Hulkenberg decided to go from Force India to Renault, you needed somebody for Force India. Esteban Ocon, that was with Manor, it now with Force India. And that brings to another question, Manor. Will we even see Manor? And we'll talk about this a little later in the show. But what's the biggest move outside of Bottas that caught your attention, Mark?
Wow, yeah, it was really kind of interesting. I think that if you took the whole Rosberg thing aside, that the grid had pretty much been decided. Obviously, Manor was a bit of an unknown, and there was a bit of a surprise that the company that ran the team had gone into administration and all that, and really bringing into doubts whether or not they'd make it to the grid. But they'd always be one of those fringe teams with a couple of pay drivers, or maybe a driver like Verheyen that's parachuted in from Mercedes or something like that. But before that, I think that the big teams were all pretty much set. Ferrari is going to be the same for next year with Sebastian Vettel and Kimi Räikkönen. Red Bull is the same with Danny Ricciardo and Max Verstappen. Obviously, Mercedes was looking the same with Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton. So for me, the big surprise at that point was Nico Hulkenberg moving from Force India over to Renault. Obviously, Renault was in their first year back in Formula One after buying out Lotus at the end of 2015. And they're in the, I guess, well, about a third of the way through a 5-year rebuilding stage. So at least at that point, prior to the Rosberg retirement, that was the big move for me. And of course, once Nico decided to call it a day, it just changed everything. And you have to think that drivers everywhere up and down the grid were trying to figure out whether or not they could get that seat. I mean, as you mentioned, Verheyen was mentioned as a possibility for that seat. Bottas was rumored for that one right off of the bat. There was a talk, of course, of all the usual suspects that you might think that, well, could Mercedes possibly pull off a move for Vettel or Alonso or Verstappen or Ricciardo, drivers that are all contracted to other teams for 2017. So it really, I think, was almost the logical thing. There is a bit of a Mercedes tie-in with Bottas and Williams. Williams, of course, are a Mercedes customer, so they get their engines from them. But still, it took 6 long weeks of negotiation, because even before Christmas, they said that they had a replacement in mind, but they might not be able to make an announcement before the end of the year. And then all of a sudden there's an announcement in the press that Niki Lauda is saying, well, we're probably not going to make an announcement till late January. And considering that the news didn't come down till Monday, January 16th, wasn't quite late January, but still, I mean, it took quite a while. But it's rumored that as part of the deal to let Bottas go to Mercedes, that Williams, obviously, they negotiated pretty hard, because, you did mention already that they managed to bring back Massa out of retirement, but that's a big thing for them too. They're already looking forward to 2017 with Bottas and Lance Stroll as their two drivers, and now they got to change everything. So the big rumor is that they're getting a pretty handsome discount on their Mercedes engines for 2017. So
that's kind of good. So because that's what the engine is literally what makes your car go round and round. You just mentioned Renault. I want to go back to Renault for a second. A news that really went under the radar on Monday because of the announcement of Bottas to Mercedes is the fact that Renault will introduce a second-generation energy recovery system in light of the new regulations. And every time, well, maybe not every time, and I'm hyperbolating here, but in Formula One history, Renault, as a constructor or as a engine manufacturer, in history, when rules were changing, when there was new development coming in, Renault a few times revolutionized the way Formula One was perceived. And maybe it's another of those opportunities where Renault discovers something new with development and finds a way to bring it to Formula One.
Well, that's a very good point that you mentioned. And I know that Adrian Newey had said just a day or so ago that he's really impressed with the developments that Renault have made to their engine over the off season. So it sounds really promising. And they're even predicting that they may not challenge for race wins right off of the bat, but conservatively, Red Bull believe that they will be able to challenge for not just podiums, but for race wins and victories sometime at least in the middle of the year. And with two guys like Danny Ricciardo and Max Verstappen, especially Max Verstappen, you have to think that if he's got a good car underneath him, he's going to have to be one of the drivers to watch in 2017. I mean, obviously he gave us plenty of moments to watch and get excited about in 2016. So he's going to be one to keep a close eye on, especially if he gets more power out of that Renault engine. So yeah, like you say, I mean, Renault have been innovators over the years, and who knows, maybe they've found something, and they've got something they're going to surprise everybody with when they get to Melbourne in about 2 months?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, the start of the season is almost in view. It's almost on the horizon.
Exactly. One thing that's almost on the horizon as well, Mark, is maybe a potential new owner for Manor. So here is an article from Autosport from yesterday. Here is the article. I'm going to read it because there's a lot of information in the article, and it's important to see the possibility of either having this team or not. So here's the article. An offer to buy the Manor Formula One team has been made, but the bidder requires an answer before Friday, Autosport has learned. Just Racing Services Limited, the company that operates Manor, went into administration last week after previous talks to find an investor broke down. It is believed the administrators, FRP Advisory LLP, are talking to interested parties, one of which has made an offer. Autosport understands the offer is for all three Manor companies, Just Racing Services Limited, Just Racing Limited, and Manor Grand Prix Racing Limited. Just Racing Limited, the holding company of Manor, and Manor Grand Prix Racing Limited, the F1 and FOM license holder, are not in administration. The bidder believes that to ensure the cars can be built and tested on time ahead of the start of the season, a decision on the offer is required before January 20th. If that deadline lapses without confirmation, the bidder could make a revised offer, but it is expected to be lower given the reduced time and increased costs required to get the team on the grid. Talking about 2 months to build the cars if this proposition is accepted. FRP Advisory LLP declined to comment when approached by Autosport, and Manor team principal Stefan Fitzpatrick could not be reached. The administrators of Just Racing Services Limited have agreed to pay all staff salaries to the end of January, extending the window to save the team. The 2017 car is ready to go into production, but parts cannot be produced as the administrators have put a block on spending to protect creditors. The new season starts in Australia on March 26th.
Isn't that interesting? But that makes a lot of sense if they want to buy the team, or the holding company that runs Manor. That makes a lot of sense that they want to get it done sooner rather than later, because there was another article that came out a couple of days ago that Toro Rosso, for example, are basically working 24/7 to make sure that they have everything ready, have the cars, the parts, everything ready for the 2017 season. So if they're just getting an answer on whether or not the sale is going to go through by the 20th of January, who knows when does that actually start? When would that take effect? When would the money start flowing so they can start manufacturing carbon fiber monocoques and wings and all these different components that need to go into the car? Obviously, that wouldn't start the same day. So seconds and minutes and hours are critical in Formula One. So that would be vitally important for their future, especially for this year, to get that done sooner rather than later, because obviously their future is quite uncertain at the moment, and they're the only team that isn't or doesn't have any drivers under contract at the moment. So I would think that they would be able to find someone, but it would be a shame to get this far, especially have the cars designed and ready to go and ready to roll off the production line and then not be able to actually do it. So we'll see.
And by the time you listen to the show, it will be the first deadline. So it's tomorrow, basically, by the time we record this. Another thing that they got some attention this week, Mark, is U.S. media conglomerate Liberty Media says its shareholders have voted to approve the buyout and takeover of Formula One. And hidden somewhere in that press release is eventually Bernie Ecclestone will be eased out of the process, having sold his share of Formula One to Liberty Media.
Seems a little bit strange to think that Bernie wouldn't be the controlling interest in Formula One when the sale goes through. I mean, considering he's been around the sport for decades, literally decades. But times have changed, and Liberty are the new kids on the block. And it'll be interesting to see what they do with it. There have been some stories coming out in recent weeks that perhaps that Silverstone, for example, will break their contract, or they've got an escape clause after 2019 because the way that there's like this sliding scale of fees to host a Grand Prix, and it increases every year, and it's becoming too expensive for them to host the Grand Prix at Silverstone. And other tracks around the UK have said that they're not interested in doing it because they'd have to reconfigure the tracks and things like that. So that would be an interesting situation, because Liberty say they appreciate the historic tracks, the historic races in F1, like Monza, Spa-Francorchamps, and Silverstone are just a couple that immediately come to mind. So that would be an interesting situation to watch, because they were saying, or Silverstone were considering going to the UK government to see if they could get some financial help. And we know here in North America how that can be a political hot potato and how that can be a very sensitive topic. I mean, how many times have we seen that over the years, that Team X in whatever city goes to the provincial, federal, state, whatever it is, whichever, Canada, America, whatever, to get funding for a new stadium. So when it's public money and taxpayer funded, then that could always be a bit of a tricky one. So we'll see what they do with that. But yeah, times are changing, and that situation is moving quite rapidly, because earlier today, the FIA approved the sale of Formula One to Liberty Media at a meeting of the World Motorsport Council. So all these important little hurdles are slowly being cleared and really setting up to really get this thing happening and make it work. And we'll see what they do with it. What I find quite fascinating is, for a company that is an American company, said that they're more focused on, I don't know, growing the sport, maybe revitalizing, maybe generating a new generation of interest in Europe as opposed to North America. Because I think that Formula One, and you'll probably agree with me, is largely an underappreciated, and the North American racing fans are a very untapped audience, don't you think?
I very, very agree with you. It's an untapped, it's a clash of two cultures, right? And it will be a interesting conundrum to see how you fit the F1 culture into the racing North American culture. And open wheel racing is not ingrained in people's thought of racing in the United States, especially if you go to the South. It's NASCAR. It's a different type of racing. Mm-hmm. It gets its grassroots from the dirt track of your town. But we're talking about a potential of a lot of fan base. And Austin has a lot of potential in the past, and we've seen other other great races having some success in the history. You have Indianapolis with the history of motor racing there, Long Beach in California with the history in Indy racing, and other places like Laguna Seca are sacred for racing. So who knows where it goes. One thing, though, that interests me as well, Mark, with the buy of F1 by Liberty Media, a media conglomerate. And it's been a few now sports properties that not only the rights have been bought, but then it's the actual properties themselves that have been bought by either media conglomerate or media companies for either reason of owning the actual company and then be able to use it and to profit off of it, or to use it as a way to grow themselves. And it's interesting to me to see now how it's media companies buying big sports properties. I'm referring to the UFC, who was bought by AMG. So that is another example of a big media company buying a sports property.
Well, the other thing, too, that will be quite interesting to watch is whether they'll consider or continue this trend to move away from some of the more traditional countries and races that we've seen over the years. I mean, 10, 15 years ago, we probably wouldn't have thought we would have seen races in places like Singapore, Malaysia, and Turkey, and India, and Korea. Some of these races, of course, have come and gone and left already. And then Baku, the European Grand Prix, that was a new one. So it'll be interesting to see if they continue this trend or what they want to do with it, because they really have taken Formula One to different countries and different markets over the past decade and a half, I guess you could say. And I think it's had some mixed results. Obviously, there's some talk that Malaysia and Singapore will not continue for very much longer. Singapore, I think, is an interesting one to think that may not be around in a couple of years, because I specifically remember an interview with Bernie Ecclestone about, not even 2 years ago, after the Singapore Grand Prix, saying that they love it there and they want to come back there as forever, basically. So, 2 years down the road and you hear that they may not want to host the Grand Prix there for very much longer is a bit of a surprise. So
it's really what have you done for me lately?
It's true, yeah.
Lately, the last few months.
That's very, very true. And I think that really is Formula One, right? I mean, everything happens in a blink of an eye, and success and things like that are fleeting. So Liberty are walking into an interesting, I think, time in the sport. And this is a little bit of a side, maybe a little bit of a tangent, but there was a comment made by our very own Jacques Villeneuve this week saying that Formula One started to go wrong when they decided to start listening to their fans, which I thought was an interesting... Well, I thought, first of all, I thought that was a very Jacques Villeneuve comment. Only a guy like Jacques would probably say that to begin with. But he makes a good point. But at the same time, I was thinking, hey, I like having an input into Formula One. I like having my voice heard, but of course, with that, I think that whatever the fans come up with, if the powers that be decide that they want some input, that they're going to have to be prepared for maybe some of the unexpected, or maybe the outlandish, or maybe even slightly crazy desires of the fans. So I can understand, respect where Jacques coming from.
I love Jacques, but did F1 actually listen to fans? Maybe listen, but did not necessarily implement things the way that it would produce result that would answer those demands of the fans. Because look at what people want. People want to see spectacular races where speed and skills are put on a track with cars to see who's the best. They don't want to necessarily see who has the best engineers. They don't want necessarily who has the biggest budget and can yield the biggest car and the best engine. Yeah, it could be a competition in itself. But for Formula One, people want to see drivers with good cars, yes. I want to see drivers test themselves and see who's the best. In a safe environment, yes. But they want to have that medium, that canvas. They want to paint on that canvas. And over the years, Formula One, instead of finding ways to produce a safe place where they can paint on that canvas, a safe place where they can do some battling on the track, try to overtake and sometimes crash in a safe way, But when you're trying to push it closer to the limit, sometimes you cross it and you crash. But if you can do that in a safe way, that's where F1 should have gone and not almost on the other side.
It's also, I think, an interesting evolution in Formula One that a lot of basically what's coming for the new regulations, the new cars from this year, is that for the first time ever, they're basically working from the back to where they need the cars to be. They're basically saying this is how we want the cars to look, and that's how they're designing them. And there's been some mixed things coming out lately that Martin Brundle, who's a pundit and commentator for Sky, he said that they're going to be monsters to drive. And then you have Red Bull driver Danny Ricciardo saying that he's looking forward to the physical challenge of driving these new cars. So there's some real mixed opinions about them, but I think that it's also interesting to see because they're also predicting that the cars are going to be faster through the corners. I think they were saying that at Barcelona, for example, I think it's in that opening series of turns in turn 2 into turn 3 that the cars will be 40 to 50 kilometers faster through the corners there. And the FIA this week has actually been in contact with all the tracks saying that they're basically going to have to upgrade and modify and accommodate these new cars because of these increased cornering speeds.
And it's something that I think is the right direction because the rules and the new rules and regulations are in place to help overtake, to help the spectacle, the drama, the show of skills. And because of those reasons, they're not going to be perfect. Cars are not going to be perfect. And that's all well and good. We don't want cars to be perfect. We want to see the driver struggle to keep it in and keeping it in and going for the other corner. It's the anniversary, would have been the anniversary of Gilles Villeneuve today. And that's what we want to see again. Other battles that Villeneuve and Arnoux had on crazy French roadsides. We want to see that again. And maybe the new rules and regulation are a step in that direction. And maybe they're not. We'll know that on March 26th.
Yeah, that absolutely. I totally agree with you. And as great as it is and exciting as it is to see impressive things like a 1.92 second pit stop that Williams pulled off, which is what a world record, isn't it? The fastest pit stop ever. It was as amazing and as exciting as and impressive as it is to see that. I think it almost takes away a little bit from the whole spectacle when you see Felipe Massa or Valtteri Bottas, whoever was in the car at that time, is racing with a Max Verstappen or a Danny Ricciardo or Nico Rosberg, whoever it is. He comes in for this amazing pit stop, but the guy behind him that was 1.1 seconds behind him stays out that 1 or 2 laps extra, puts in a fast lap, and then when Bottas comes out of his pits after this fantastic stop by the Williams crew, he comes out and he's 2 car lengths behind the guy that was just behind him. And that's the disappointing thing. And I think that's made Formula One a little bit underwhelming and doesn't quite deliver what the sport is all about when you have all these amazing things going on in the cars, in the pits, and then the overtake, which should be the spectacle. The part that really gets the fans most excited is the part that they're almost cheated out of because it just, it happens when the one guy is in the pits instead of the guy slipstreaming down the straights or somebody making a really brave overtaking maneuver, braking a little bit too late, or a guy like Max Verstappen who's going to pass wherever the hell he wants to.
You know what? I have a theory about that, Mark, and I'm going to lay it here right for you, our listeners, and for you, Mark. When you're looking at drivers, how young they are, they come into a setting where they don't necessarily feel in control all the time. They're not going to do what they're not supposed to. They're not going to disrespect the rules, intern rules, of the team. They're going to do what they're supposed to. They're not going to take risk when they're not supposed to. They're not going to try to overtake when they're not supposed to. Everything is calculated. Everything is designed that every single movement they do on that track is predetermined. Max Verstappen is not that way. And look at the attention and look at the spectacle, that the actual entertainment that Max Verstappen gave us this year by overtaking when you're not supposed to, putting 2 wheels on the grass and trying to come back and trying to be in front of the other guy, trying to go for it when you're not supposed to, winning your first race with your new team. How about that? And Max Verstappen did that because of being able to control and save his tires and save some fuel, but because he can overtake as well. And that's been impressive. And that's the goal of it. So because of the pressure of the young drivers, where they're not supposed to do anything wrong and they'll lose their job if they do, well, it's all the same and nobody trying to take any risk.
Yeah, and you're nailing it right on the head there. And I think that for me, just expanding on that a little bit, that the overtaking maneuver of the entire year would have been Max Verstappen on Nico Rosberg on turn 3, I think it was, at Interlagos in the rain, where they went around that through the Santa S, and then they go into that third corner, the Curva do Sol or whatever it is, and Max went on the outside. And there wasn't really a dry line at that point. There was just the racing line, which was maybe a little bit drier than the rest of the track. Anyhow, that didn't mean anything to Max. He went offline, went off into the wet part of the circuit. Obviously, had way more grip than Nico did. And, of course, a lot of courage. And he just put the hammer down and passed him. And that was fantastic. And I think that's what Max Verstappen is all about. And it'll be cool to see whether or not some of these other young guys like Lance Stroll and Stoffel van Dorn at McLaren are going to be a similar type driver. And I mean, there's a lot of young guys in Formula One now, and that maybe leads into one of the last discussions I wanted to have this week, is that with Bottas now under contract at Mercedes, and this is the fascinating part about it, is you're driving for a team that's a decent team in Williams, which probably gives you a shot to get a podium. Maybe in certain circumstances, you might get a shot at a race win. But obviously, they're not a Mercedes. They're not even a Ferrari or a Red Bull. Not at least in the last year or so. But anyhow, you get a chance to take that extra seat, and then you sign a 1-year deal with an option at Mercedes, because why not? You could take it, but then you think, wow, that's only a 1-year deal. And then you look at the driver market for 2018, you have not only Sebastian Vettel, but Fernando Alonso, who will be free, basically. They are not under contract beyond 2017 at Ferrari and McLaren, respectively. So that really opens things up, because it's fascinating because, first of all, you get Bottas going to Mercedes. He signs the contract. He gets basically endorsed by the guy he's replacing, Nico Rosberg. He gets endorsed by his new teammate, Lewis Hamilton. He gets endorsed by Toto Wolff and Niki Lauda. Everybody's saying he's the man. He's the one that can get it done. And then 3 days later, you get Toto Wolff saying on Finnish radio, well, yeah, we believe that Valtteri is our guy, but, we're keeping our options open for 2018. What do you make about that?
Well, he needs to prove himself this season. He never won in consistent basis, Bottas, and that's what he's going to be asked to do. If it's not going to be Hamilton, it's going to be him. So he needs to prove this season that he can continuously, on a regular basis, be very close to Lewis Hamilton, if not in front of him. That's his goal. That's his expectation for this year. And if he doesn't cut it, they're going to find somebody else for next year. It's as easy as that. And it's all on Bottas to show that he can be at the same level as Lewis Hamilton.
Definitely. I think that when you kind of go through the entire, I guess, process of looking at who would have been the guy to put into the seat for this year, Bottas was the logical guy to put in there. I mean, really, when you think about it, there would be no way that they would get Vettel away from Ferrari or Alonso away from McLaren when they're under contract. Even some of the big bosses at Red Bull said that Mercedes allegedly approached them about the availability about both of their drivers, Verstappen and Ricciardo. But I mean,
that's what I saw as well.
Yeah, that's just not going to happen. I mean, everybody has a price. I mean, let's be fair. I mean, as much as Red Bull wants to keep Max Verstappen because he's obviously, I'm not even going to say a star of the future. He's the star of right now. And obviously, I think it's only a matter of time before he starts winning more races. And who knows, perhaps maybe even a world championship at some point. But everybody has a price, even Max Verstappen. The question is, would a team like Mercedes be willing to pay the obvious astronomical price to Red Bull if they said, okay, sure, we'll let Max go, but it's going to cost you this? So I think probably out of all the different options available to them, that Bottas was the logical conclusion and the guy to put in the seat for this year. And then, of course, and Toto even said that, and I think the word that he used, that the driver market for 2017 is dynamic or fluid, whatever it is. I think dynamic was the word that he used. And yeah, who knows what's going to happen next year? There could be.
Let's not forget about Pascal Verlaine too, who was a potential candidate for the job right now, but because of Bottas they came to an agreement with Williams to get Bottas. Verlaine was not the one chosen, and Verlaine was put with right now with I forget right now, I blank, but with Sauber. So Verlaine with Sauber. So right now it could have been Verlaine, but no, it's Bottas. They came to an agreement, and you're right. It will be fascinating to see if Bottas can live to the expectation. But it's true, though. Rosberg said Bottas is a good fit to replace himself. So that's interesting. You replace a German by a Finn, but with a team that's used to having a lot of Finn in their history, at least when they were an engine manufacturer with Mika Häkkinen.
Well, that's right. How well did Mika Häkkinen do when he was driving the Silver Arrows and when he won his world championship? I mean, he was obviously one of the best drivers of that generation. Obviously, I think that at that time, I think the two big guys that really went at it at that particular point would have been Schumacher and Häkkinen. Schumacher in the Ferrari, Häkkinen in the McLaren. Those were some great moments. But just going back to Verlaine, obviously he was a consideration for Mercedes, but Toto ultimately said that he felt at this point, even though that Verlaine is one of these Mercedes contracted drivers and that stable of how many young guys that they have that they have at their disposal, that he felt that Verlaine would benefit from another year or two at a smaller, maybe not quite as big profile team like Mercedes, but he would benefit being at a team like Sauber. And that's interesting. So who knows where Pascal Verlaine might be in a couple of years. He's only 22 years old, so he's got plenty of time, and he's obviously got plenty of talent too, because what did he get? What was his best qualifying in 2016? Didn't he get like a 10th on the grid? I can't remember which Grand Prix it was.
Or a 10th or 11th, I believe.
Yeah, which in a manner I think is impressive. He managed to get out of Q1 a couple of times, several times in 2016, and I think that really is a testament to the skill and the talent that he has as a driver. So he's one to watch for the future. And as we close out the show now, we've talked about things we know about, and we've speculated on other things. There's one more thing to speculate on, and that is, what color are the McLarens going to be? I just mentioned the Silver Arrows of the Mercedes-engined era McLarens, but there is a rumor out there that, well, the one thing we do know is that the new CEO, Zach Brown, has said that there will be a change to the colors of the car. Apparently, they've come up with a new scheme, and this has been signed off by the senior staff at McLaren. And there is a rumor out there that they're going to be orange cars for McLaren, which plays a little bit on their history, but they wanted to move in a new direction and maybe revitalize and re-energize, have a brand new look for the team. Just like I feel re-energized and rejuvenated and all fresh to go for this season. That just comes from a couple of weeks of resting and relaxing, enjoying the holidays here, but they really want to get this team going again, and apparently a new look is part of the deal.
Yeah, and I'm quite happy about it, because if you are a long-time listener of the show, you know my thoughts on the branding and the look that McLaren did have last year. Just the way their outfit looked with the bare bones, minimalist, and not a lot of sponsors look, and your car that was black and nondescript. It was kind of lacking identity, and maybe that new color, maybe that new branding of logo and icon and design of the car will give a much needed identity to McLaren.
Yeah, and that is the perfect way to describe it. Nondescript and lacking in an identity. I mean, you look at other cars and other teams up and down the grid. I mean, you look at the Mercedes, which is silver, which is their color, and obviously it doesn't need to be anything more than that. Just like the Ferrari is red, the scarlet, and you look at other teams, you look at Red Bull, who are a little bit edgier in some of the cool designs that they've had over the years. And then you looked at the McLaren, and it just kind of really left you wanting a lot more. And that black, I think, really was disappointing. Like you say, it just didn't do anything for the car. It was a fairly nice looking car, which maybe still was obviously lacking the power and the performance that they wanted, but they were kind of coming back. And they've even said that if they finish anything lower than fourth in the Constructors' Championship this year, that would be a disappointment. But based on what we've seen over the last couple of years, I don't know. I think if I was at McLaren, I would be pretty happy to finish fourth in the Constructors' Championship. But, I guess when you have the history and all the honors that a team like McLaren has, you obviously have high expectations. But where high expectations and realistic expectations meet is a completely different question.
Yes. And if your expectations are to finish top 4 and realistically top 8 is more an achievable goal, you're setting yourself up for disappointment.
Yeah, I think so. But we will find out soon enough. The first Grand Prix of the year is, well, I keep thinking it's actually closer than it is, but March 26th will come faster than you realize. It always seems to be a long winter between the very last race of the year, which has been in Abu Dhabi the last several years, to the first race of the year in Australia at Melbourne. And then once it starts, it goes. So it'll come soon enough. But I don't know. What else you got for this week, Evan?
Oh, you can listen to Soccer Today on SPN Radio Monday to Friday, 10 a.m. this week. And a new show debuting on the network tomorrow, I Need a Mulligan, a show by TK Goldsmith that tackles college football, craft beer, bourbon, golf, and other sports from a Nebraska point of view. So look forward to that tomorrow on the network.
Very cool. And before you go, where can everybody find you online?
You can follow me on Twitter at Kev Laramie and on Facebook, Kevin Laramie, and find all the shows that we do here on the network at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
Awesome. Thank you very much. All right. And you can find this show on Twitter at Scuderia F1 Pod. And you can also email us if you have any questions or comments at scuderiaf1pod@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at MarkJRDaily, and that's a daily with an EY at the end. And that's it. That's a wrap for episode 25 of Scuderia F1. We will be back again very soon with all the latest news from Formula One. Until then, on behalf of myself and Kevin Laramie, thank you very much for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Scuderia F1 podcast. If you want to get the show notes for this episode, then head over to ScuderiaF1pod.com. Want to get in touch with us? Then email us at ScuderiaF1pod@gmail.com.
You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.